Hi. So full disclosure, I said to Alisyn, I saw your book tour and I'm so excited you're going to RJ Julia because I love RJ Julia. And then she said, would you want to come to I said, oh, really? Sure, I'd love to.
Thank God you're here. The audience.
Throw the word out there. Not that I needed to, but so this is really exciting. So I texted you, I think this week, and just say when I started reading this book, and maybe you can really, I couldn't put it down. It was so good. And I didn't really know what to expect. And so a few things jumped out at me, which I think will probably jump out at a lot of people that we'll dig into. But one of the first things in the start of a book, you make a mention to what someone identified as your special sauce and the ability that you have to connect with people. And I thought, even before I met you, and I think probably for a lot of people who have watched you for years, I saw that immediately. You have this beautiful ability to connect with people, right? To make them feel welcome, whether they're on the other side of the screen or sitting across from you, and want to share their story. And in turn, for you to now share your story, it's a lot for someone to put their life out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for a lot of people are wondering, why did you want to tell the story?
Yes, people are wondering that, including my mother.
She's here, so that's a good thing.
It's a wonderful thing, and it does speak to her always cheerleading for me. I think that what you're touching on is really interesting because I think on television as anchors, and I'm sure you can relate to this, we're often seen as people who are kind of perfect. We have well-coiffed hair, usually we're in jewel tones, we have a mask of makeup on, and I've even had some people sort of suggest that, we couldn't have had a hard day. Like they imagine that we've never had a hard day. And that's just not true. And I felt that the anchor mask, at some point was a distance between the viewers and between the people that I was interviewing. And mostly what I thought was that in these divided times, I just think that it's helpful right now to explain that we all have a story of struggle behind the mask. Whatever the facade is that people are wearing in public, it's not that we're lying, it's just that there's something else in there that could bond us. And so I'm always looking for the bond between people rather than the division, and particularly now. So I thought that it might, be helpful on some level. So that's why I thought universally that I should tell it. But personally, for myself, I wanted to write it because I had a lot of unfinished business. And by going back and exploring my own personal stories and interviewing all of the people in the story, every primary person in the book, I was able to get a lot of closure and tie up a lot of loose ends.
Was anybody resistant to being, so all the names are changed in the book. Was anybody resistant to you sharing your story in moments that involved them?
A couple of people. My mother was the most. My mom said repeatedly, so this took me a long time, many years to write because I have a day job and because I have kids and because I wrote another book in the process, but it was always in my head. So I was writing it for many years. And during all of those years, my mother said, can't you wait until I'm dead? And she said that repeatedly. And the answer is no. And I'm so glad I didn't ultimately, because my mother is such a wonderful family historian. She knows our shared story well, and she knows the story before I was born, that helps put some of the pieces together. So I interviewed her, which was really, really helpful. And ultimately she came around kicking and screaming. But so she's one of the people. And then there's one of my best friends in the book who we call Viv in the book. She, what I realized is that a lot of this is a nostalgic journey back to my teenage years, which are very vivid for me, very like in Technicolor. And I have a very fond affection for my teenage years. And for Viv, she struggled, as you'll read, with alcohol and substance abuse. And so when I was going back to interview her, I was like, okay, so remember that night when we were in the car and I was writing, and I was like, it was so funny because we went to see the show and she said, Alisyn, I wasn't really well during those years. And she sort of had to like break it to me that this wasn't a fun ride for her to go back and revisit all this. And it was like a splash of like cold water in my face that, my nostalgic fun amusement park ride is like a sickening ride for her.
Yeah.
And she still, despite that, she still helped me, and she still never told me not to write it or not to include her or anything like
And
that.
she's vividly, I mean, when you say Technicolor, I mean, you're such an excellent writer, first of all, but you really bring these scenes to life, and you bring her scenes to life, and even some of, I don't want to give too much away, but some of her struggles. And I think that lends to, right, you're a very authentic person, right? But I'm lucky enough to know that. I think what we see in this book and your voice as you're putting it all out there is the authenticity of all of these moments. You're not trying to sugarcoat it. And you're also not, it's a story of your survival, but it is in no way the story of you being a victim.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I really always felt that way. I mean, I never felt really victimized. And I really did feel that it was the story of my survival. And I think that survival stories are inspirational. I know when I read somebody's survival story, I'm always really inspired. And I did have a dream starting when I was 15 to be a TV reporter and anchor. And I did it, I did it. And I did it without any pathway, without any resources. I didn't know anybody in TV news. I often, I was broke a lot of the time, and I managed to do it. And so I hope that's inspiring to other young women and other people. And in terms of the Viv story, I think a lot of people can relate to loving someone with addiction. And I knew a lot of people who had addiction in my teenage years. So there was no sugarcoating it. It's just, it's hard as hell to have somebody in your life and somebody who you care about and love who struggles with drugs and alcohol. It's hard as hell to have to witness that. And so I talk about all the drugs in the 80s that I was around, but I think that what I tried to capture was that a lot of people were derailed by it. I wasn't, amazingly, but a lot of my friends were. And it's really hard to even watch that going through it.
You have, your kids are, so your girls are 19 and your son is 17.
Yes.
Have they read the book?
No.
Do they want to?
No.
Do you
I would be happy to have them read it. I'm not ashamed of anything. A lot of parents, I think, do sugarcoat things and try to, keep their kids from knowing that there were drugs or alcohol or sex or whatever in their past. But I never have been like that with my kids because my kids know my present day friends. If you survived 1980s New Jersey, okay, it generally means you got clean, you matured, you got healthier. So they know my friends now, some of whom are featured in the book, and they know that they struggled. So I never thought that it was like glamorizing drugs for my kids or, underage sex or anything like that, because I think it paints a full story of it. And I would be happy for them to read it. But what happened was I warned them again, like my mom, I warned them the whole time that I was writing this. I was like, guys, the 80s were different, right? The 80s are different than they are now. Like that we were, free range. Okay, guys, that you guys have not been. And I kept warning them. And then what happened was it just took so long to write it that they aged out of wanting, they aged out of me being nervous about the topics, number one. And number two, they're in college. The girls are in college. Yeah. They no more have a week to carve out to read their mother's memoir. They're in classes. They're going to their a cappella group, they're doing stuff. So I don't know when they'll get around to reading.
It's interesting you're not romanticizing, because I don't think that you do, but everything is so matter of fact, which I also found really refreshing. I grew up in a house where we didn't talk about sex. I remember I had to bring it up with my mom, and even then, you can tell Cheryl this. Not really into that conversation. And I love that you had such a smart outlook on it. So to me, that's a great lesson, not just for your kids, right? But even setting an example for anybody else who may read it.
I appreciate you saying that, because I really debated, do people really want to hear their anchor talk about her sex life? There's something gross about that. An anchor is such a neutral person. She's not an actress where we recognize, we know their love lives. An anchor is so neutered I think, almost. I mean, you just don't want to think about your anchor's love life. I know I don't. I mean, we were part of why we were appalled at Matt Lauer was like, ew. Holy, you know what I mean? Like, you're our morning show guy. And so I really wrestled with it. But ultimately, the reason I decided to include my teenage experiences was because what happened in 2017, as you'll all recall, with the Me Too movement, speaking of Matt Lauer, is there started to be this narrative. In fact, I don't know if you remember, but I did an hour-long special for CNN about rape on college campuses, sexual assault and rape on college campuses, binge drinking, horrible frat party behavior, and sexual assault. And it's awful. There are stats that's like 1 in 5 women on a college campus are sexually assaulted. And that was so in the ether. And we were talking about it so much, including the Me Too movement and all the sexual harassment and sexual assault, that I was like, this can't be the only narrative that my teenage girls hear. There is a way for teenage girls to have agency, to be responsible, and to have positive sexual experiences. I know it. I'm living proof of it. And I thought, I'm going to include this so that there's just another side and a better way to do it than what we all are talking about on the news.
Well, as you said, when you're sharing your story, you're hoping that it is, you know, maybe it's inspiring somebody or maybe empowering somebody to share their story. That also, right? That part of it, that is maybe empowering a young woman to have that agency and to say, I get to make these decisions.
Totally.
This is me and this is my story.
Totally. I mean, I want young women to feel empowered. I feel like my friends and I were. I hope that hasn't gone out of style. And to my mother's credit, as you'll read in the book, my mother never shied away from this conversation with me. She always was like, well, okay, one of my rules growing up, one of the big rules that my mother instilled was you are not to get pregnant. And it was never, you're not to have sex. It was, you're not to get pregnant. That's different. And so she, from very early, she was like, you always must use birth control. It was never a question of like, is a teenager going to have sex? Like, of course a teenager's going to have sex.
But you're a human being.
You're you're a teenager. Yeah. And so I really, really appreciated that, because so many of my friends' parents are a little bit more like what you're describing, which is hear no evil, see no evil. Maybe if we don't talk about it, it will never happen. And that was not true.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah.
I think we all know that, like, in a lot of houses too, the less you talked about it, the more people were out there experimenting, or the more things were restricted.
Or the less responsible you were. Like, if you couldn't talk about it, then you certainly couldn't tell your parents or explain that you were going to go to Planned Parenthood or go to the doctor, because you had to keep it a secret.
Right.
And I just saw it with my teenage friends that didn't work out so well.
So, shifting slightly here, a large part of this book too is about you searching, right? You're searching for belonging, you're searching for a home, you're searching for, I guess, that place, that stability, that comfort. When did you finally find it?
Well, I felt like I had a real sense of belonging when I was an adolescent and a teenager in my hometown in Shrewsbury, New Jersey. So I felt like I had finally gotten into the cool group that I wanted to be in. And they were so important to me. My friends, I was an only child. And so friends were like surrogate family to me. And that was really important. So I finally made it into this group that I had admired from afar. And I made it. I felt like I belonged. It was a wonderful sense of community. And then we moved. And so we moved. My mom wanted to move 3,000 miles away to this place where we, in Washington State, where we knew virtually what we knew. I mean, truly one person. Yeah. And it was so disorienting to me and so uprooting that I then spent the next decades looking for a place that I belonged again. And I had a few tastes of it, but they were short-lived. And then, you know, I really did not fully feel that sense of home again until I got married and had my kids. So, I mean, very, you know, relatively recently. So, as you said, my kids are 19 and 17, and that was the first time since we left Shrewsbury that I felt a real sense of roots and home and belonging.
And you really like being it. I mean, it's a very traditional upbringing for your kids. I mean, at least as I understand it, right, in your home, and that really is your happy place.
It is. Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, I think that I'm just so grateful that I have a healthy marriage and that I have a stable home. And I think that, I don't know, I'm like becoming a TV reporter. That also was my dream. Having a stable home and healthy marriage and everything was a dream of mine. And so that one took longer to achieve than the career one. The career one actually was easier for me.
Yeah. You talked about one of your mom's roles being don't get pregnant. She had a couple other ones, but you'll have to read. I was struck by one of your sort of adapted rules, I guess you could say, that you came up with, which was and I may be paraphrasing here, but leave before you get left. Which was really such a big part of, I mean, maybe until you met your husband, right? Was such a big part of your life. Where did that come from? Was it from the move or something else?
I think that it was a guiding principle of my life. Leave before you get left, I thought would protect me from pain and vulnerability and hurt. And because I thought growing up and throughout my teenage years and my 20s that there were only two choices. You either leave or you get left. That's it. That's all you get. So I didn't know there were other things. So I thought leaving was better than being left. And, I mean, what the origin of it was, my parents got divorced. My father was always distant, even when my parents were married. My father was distant. And then once my parents got divorced, my mother was much more distracted. She was getting her PhD. She was trying to find her way. She was trying to find her way in her love life. She was trying to find her way in her career. And so I did feel abandoned a lot of the time. And so I had this rule in my own love life, that I would just try to always protect myself and, break up with somebody or leave before they would invariably, I thought, leave me. And, it did. That's not a great
Doesn't always work out.
That's not a great pattern.
Yeah. That's
if you're looking for a stable marriage and children. And it took me therapy and lots of life experience to break that.
When you were putting this together, and as you're saying, it's taken you a lot of years. Was there anything that surprised you in going back over all of these moments?
I think that I had to be honest when I was putting it together with how, selfish and bad I'd been to people. I knew that, but I didn't have to really confront it until I went back and was writing these stories. And I went back and interviewed every primary person in the book, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in decades. And I had to be like, hi, I know that I was a shithead, but I'm just wondering if I can call you so I can ask you about this story.
Confirm a couple of details from
How shitty I was. And one of them, I'm thinking of one of my first boyfriends in there who was just, I must say, even starting at 13, had very good taste in men. I just did. I had very good instincts and very good taste in men, as my friend Jane, who surprised me here, can attest. And so I in calling everybody, first of all, I'm still in touch with a lot of them, because once you're my friend or once you're a part of my life, you're kind of there forever. I'm very loyal in that way to my friends. But this one guy that I broke up with so fast that it made his head spin. He just didn't really know what had happened, and I didn't offer any explanation. And so I had to call him back. And he is such a nice guy still to this day. I call him back and I go, hey, I'm sorry. I know that I was really selfish and really shitty and you deserve better. And he goes, Alisyn, I just thought you were ready to move on. I just thought you wanted something bigger. And so how kind, And I don't know, I guess my feeling about writing the book in terms of surprise is the amount of closure that everybody gave me. Everybody was willing, when I called, to show up at lunch and to come and tell me their side of the story and to answer my questions and to tell me what they remembered and how kind people were.
Isn't that also a testament to you, though, and likely the people that you attract because of who you are?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that ultimately, like, I kind of just felt like people were good. People are good and they were happy to help. And, there was one guy in here who was one of the most hard drug doing, leather wearing, just dangerous guys of my teenage years. And, it turns out that underneath that mask, underneath that costume, is like an incredibly warm-hearted, lovely guy. Now, mind you, he doesn't do heroin anymore. And so he's grown, like, when people get clean, they have a lot more self-awareness and everything. But he was such a sweet guy and so considerate. And so we went out to lunch and I had to ask him about one of the episodes in there, which was really a scary night. Something happened. I was going to see this band that I loved named Shrapnel, and we were at this bar in the middle of Queens, and something, crazy ends up happening. And I said to him, but we haven't ever spoken about it. Okay. So he was, 19.
This is the first time they've ever talked.
This is the first time we've ever talked about it. I mean, and I said, so do you remember a night that we went to a bar called Zappa's to see Shrapnel? And he goes, something messed up happened that night. I go, yeah, it did. What do you remember? So like his memory was pure because like it hadn't been diluted,
right.
And he was willing to help me. Anyway, the point of all of this is that now that he's clean, he is a wonderful guy. And he says to me, what would be great, Alisyn, is if my daughter could get an internship at CNN.
Is that why you have lunch?
It's just like, oh my God, like everybody ends up in the same place, which is wanting an internship for their kid. Of how leather wearing you were as a teenager.
And we still have zero pull in that. It's true. What's the time when we did it? I love that I love it when there are pictures in a book about someone and there's some pictures in there. So you'll go over them. But one of the pictures in the book is of this popcorn tin.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of your research material, if you will, and your source material is in this tin. How often do you sit there and go, I mean, maybe tell people what's in it, but like how often do you have days where you just sit there and like, you know what, I'm gonna relive this. Oh yeah, that was that.
No, because that takes up the entire day. If I go down that rabbit hole, I'm gone. Like so anyway, the popcorn tin is something that I've carted around with me since I was 15, and it has every love letter and letters from my mom and postcards from people who were traveling. I'm sure there's letters from Jane in there, and it has ticket stubs and just all of the, ephemera of my teenage life. And I did open it, Pandora's box, for writing the book because I needed to double check dates and look at letters. And I was just it truly is a Pandora's box. When I opened it, I fell down the rabbit hole massively because there are some people who I thought, some of the important relationships that you'll read about in the book, in my memory, those people, one of the guys, a guy named Jake in the book, in my memory, he's always kind of standing at a distance. I can see him in full frame, kind of at a distance. But when I open the popcorn box, there's pictures, and in every picture, his arm is around me. His arm is around me in every picture. And there's love letters from him. A lot of love letters. And so it's like in my head, I thought that he was abandoning me all the time. But he wasn't all the time. And, that's just like, it's all in there. And so opening it up is really intense. And it's the history of my life. All of my mom's letters are, meticulously dated, thank God. And I was able to cross-reference everything in there. And I've included some of the letters in there that were the most crucial.
You've also included some of the song lyrics, right? Which, I mean, the title is one of the Shrapnel songs.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize, so correct me if I'm wrong on this, as I was reading through the book, at one point I realized they didn't even have an album. So you're obsessed with this band, but you couldn't even really listen to it like in your bed.
That's right. They had a single. And so I would have to go to shows. The reason I had to keep risking my life to go to punk rock clubs when I was underage was because I had to hear the songs in person because they weren't on the radio. And all I had was the one single, but they had a whole list of songs. And I loved the songs. And I would go and say like, memorize it this time, so I could sing it to myself. Ultimately, later they came out with an album.
Right.
And I love that too, but it wasn't those original songs that were so formative to me.
So do you have any copies of those original songs? Do they exist anywhere?
So about 5 years ago on Facebook, I found a Shrapnel Facebook group, and there were cassette tapes being sold, cassette tapes live from their shows of Shrapnel. And I immediately bought the cassette tapes. But guess what? You can't play a cassette tape anymore. But now I don't have the technology to play the cassette tapes.
You can buy that online too.
Okay.
Little eBay.
Okay.
Now I know what to get you.
Thank you.
I can get you in. It's amazing. I'm checking your.
Well, I mean, part of it is that like that is part of why it embedded in my memory and lived in my memory for so long, was because I couldn't even satisfy the itch of playing their music. So it just got embedded in my head, and I never got to hear it enough. And then that left me just hungry forever of wanting more Shrapnel.
We're probably just open up for questions very soon, but you alluded to the fact that there are these moments in the book where you did feel a little close to death and danger for me.
Mm-hmm.
How much in those moments specifically, I don't know, when you almost, died at some bat wielding skinheads. Like how many of those moments did you realize like, oh shit, this could go south like tomorrow? Like I may not make it home.
In every one of them, in every one of those moments. The funny thing about me is that I was a scaredy cat. I was a scaredy cat as a child. I couldn't play any sports. I was scared of a ball coming towards me. I'd like scream. I didn't, kids would go off a rope swing and like jump, fall into the lake. I was like, like I didn't do stuff like that. And so the fact that I find myself in these precarious, life-threatening situations is very out of character for me at that time. But every single time in the middle of one of those situations, and one of them that Erica's alluding to, I had gone out to a car outside of the iconic music club, punk rock club called CBGB's in New York. So in 1980s, it's in the Bowery, Lower East Side Bowery, which is like the most burned out, awful neighborhood you can imagine in 1981 and 82. And I was at a show at CBGB's and I was tired. And the rule for all of our friends is if you were tired, you had to go to the car. Like nobody was leaving. It wasn't like anybody was going to leave the show. So if you were tired, you had to go out to the car, and that was it. And so I knew the penance. I went out to the car, and I was sleeping in the back seat of my friend's car, and I awoke to the sound of shattering glass with punk rock skinheads with baseball bats breaking into cars and stealing the stereos or whatever they wanted, which is what happened all the time in that year in New York as well as in the Bowery. And so I curl into the footwell of the car and I'm shaking with like my hands over my ears of the glass. And I was thinking the whole time, please let me make it home, please let me make it home, please let me make it home alive, please let me make it home. So I knew all the time that I might die.
It's so interesting that you say you were such a scaredy cat because you don't come off as that at all.
But
don't come out as so confident.
I was confident. I was always a confident, self-assured kid. I was a good student, but I was a very physically scared. And I mean, I do talk about how like nobody ever wanted me on their team. There was a fist fight that broke out in like 6th grade of who had to take me on their team. And they sort of like punching each other. And I was like, wow, they really don't want me on their team. And so like I physically wasn't capable in that way, but I was confident. I was a confident personality in that way.
Yeah. Which is so that's always one of the things I admired about you. I think to say like your confidence in your in addition to your connection. Should we open up to questions?
Yes.
First question is always hard to get the first question going.
How old were you when you left New Jersey? Maybe you said it.
No, we moved when I was 15. So I was a sophomore in high school. And it was November of my sophomore year, and we moved to Washington State. And then, spoiler alert, I came back on my own for my senior year because I missed my high school so much and I missed my friends so much. And so you'll read about how I was able to do that.
So not so much a question as it is kind of like going back to you as a TV personality or an anchor, and I think for me, the book, like, it just in this time of divide, like, we see people on TV and we do think that they're like perfect. So I think it's nice to see you're a real person and have real struggles that like everybody else does. And I think it brings kind of like that neutered person to being able to be a real person. And that's kind of like what I took, because I also have been watching you too. And so it's refreshing to know that like we're everyday people, but somebody else also has had struggles in real life situations, and I enjoyed reading it for that reason.
Thank you. I mean, that's my goal, and I really appreciate you saying that. You know, I remember when I was interviewing the day after the George Floyd killing, I interviewed his brother, Wholeness Floyd. I think it was his first national interview, and it was a very raw and very emotional interview, and it very, very heartrending. And I didn't, you know, I just wanted to help him. He desperately wanted justice for his brother, even though he was in deep grief at the moment. And I just wanted to kind of be his conduit to get his message out. But I didn't, you know, I no longer try to stop myself from crying. If I feel teary on TV, you know, there was a time in our business where you are totally stone-faced, you know, and you aren't supposed to laugh or cry or whatever. And I think that time has passed. And, you know, if I tear up, I think the audience is still with me. I don't think they are going to hold that against me. And so I wasn't sobbing or anything. I tried not to do that, but if I tear up, I was doing that during that interview. And what happened after that interview, George Floyd has had a girlfriend at the time when he was killed, and she and I have since like become friends. Wow. And she texts me all the time like, great dress. And my mom wants me to ask you, you know, where did you get your dress? Right? And like, I love that. And so I guess my point is that occasionally when I do show a kind of human side, it just, people connect, you know, it just pays
so
off.
much more. I agree. Like, I feel that connection when I'm watching someone on the news, and it makes it so much more real.
I think so too. And I think particularly in this time when we're all looking for connection, I don't know. I think we can change the rules of news anchors. I mean, I feel, let me also say, I have always felt that way about you too. Your appeal is that you're so human. You can do anything. You're seamless. You're so much, oh my God, you read a prompter so much better than I do. Flawless as a prompter reader and all of that. But also everybody does somehow relate to you. You just project it. You project it. And that's just so much better right now. I mean, that's what we need.
Isn't it better to be just a real person?
Yes.
Like, I don't ever see you as someone who is
authoritative.
Not what I was going for. No, it's someone who's ever acting in that role. I think you'll meet people, right? You know, if anyone intern, it's interesting. I think you'll meet. I'm sure you've had this question from interns. They'll say like, "Well, how do you do that? And what's your anchor voice? And how do you?" I mean, I have one slipped with my kids being very serious, talking about drugs, and my older son said, "Mom, you just went into anchor voice." And it's like, I mean, you don't have your Alisyn on camera and off, right? And I think people do, like to Jamie's point, people expect that too nowadays because they want you to be more authentic, because it's so easy to see through when it's bullshit, right? When you're crying, but you're not actually moved by something in that moment, right? It's sort of a, oh, maybe I should be a little more emotional here. So I think you're right. Like I think it's evolved into that, and I think that's a good thing. I do too. But I think that it's when anchors are too distant. When they put a distance there and they think that there's a screen between the viewers and us, I just don't think that that's what we need right now. It's like nobody needs a know-it-all telling them. But, right? I mean, I don't think that like that doesn't work either. I agree. Yeah.
Nobody needs, when you guys were talking, I was just thinking like, have you ever asked Alexa for like the news highlights today? And this, it's like, oh, never mind.
Done that.
That would be the perfect robot voice.
I'm sure this is in the book, and perhaps I should wait till I buy it. But I'm just wondering, when you were talking about your boyfriend that you had, and you finally went back to see him, and he said, I thought that you wanted to move on. what was the real reason why you left? Was it the leave before it get left? Because it
No.
sounded like you really liked him.
Right. I liked him for a while. I think I just was selfishly, I just did want to move on. I wanted to move on. I wanted to, he was he was a very nice, straight, sweet guy.
Robbie.
That's
Robbie, right?
Robbie. And he was just a solid, sweet guy, and I was really young, and I wanted more excitement, and that was when I was discovering Shrapnel, the band, and I was trying to figure out a way to go see Shrapnel and hang out with the Shrapnel crowd and still go out with Robbie, and that was just not working. And so with that, it was true. But with later, there's a Jake character in here who's very charismatic, handsome, wonderful guy that Jane knows. And I was always trying to leave him before he left me. Always. Because I thought that it's just a matter of time. And that he's the one who I found like all the pictures of him with his arm around. Like,
I find that so fascinating that you would think of him in a different way than actually it was.
I know.
And I think that we probably all do that, thinking how people felt about us or we felt about others, and then you find out later that maybe that, and you had the option and the advantage of going back and talking to them.
Yes.
And there are so many people that you will never see again, but you probably don't even have the right attitude toward them or think they had a different attitude.
I
toward
agree.
you.
I mean, that is part of the lack of closure that I had in my life, which is I really like resolution and I like closure, and I don't want false impressions, and so I am so grateful that I've been able to have closure with really all of the people in the book, mostly my parents, my mother and my father. They lived long enough, and I know not everybody gets this opportunity, and they stayed present for me to go back and tell them my impressions of what had gone wrong and to hear their stories. Well, my mom's, my you'll read in the book, my father's was a much shorter conversation, but wise in its own way. And that is such a gift, because I know a lot of people get that. And sometimes even if your parents do live long enough, they're not open to having that come to Jesus conversation, and mine were.
I think so.
I'm curious, I've got another, you go ahead, I'll go after.
No, I was just gonna say, I admire both of you so much. You're so engaging and authentic. And we had the very serious COVID years, and we were home and felt like we were part of the family. And I love when you're paired up with John Behrman. I just wanted to say that.
I appreciate you saying that, because I felt my purpose. I felt our purpose a lot during that time. I felt our purpose during the 2016 election. I felt our purpose in 2020. I felt it during COVID. Like, there were times that it's hard to wake up at 3 a.m. and go to work. But during particularly what you're talking about, I thought, oh, people are counting on me. I have to go in. I knew people were waking up in the morning going, what's the situation? Has a vaccine been developed yet? How many people are in hospitals? I just knew that I had to show up for that.
I was gonna ask, in the book, is there a particular, chapter, or even sometimes authors are very proud of even a sentence that they crafted? Anything that sticks out to you where you feel really proud of your ability as a writer?
Yes, there's, I have a lot of lines that have played in my head during the process of writing, because I do hear words. Words mean a lot to me, just like lyrics in a song. I learn lyrics very easily, and I also remember dialogue very clearly. So that's kind of just how my brain works. And it's not necessarily that I'm so proud of how I crafted a sentence. It's that there are things that were said to me decades ago that were so funny that I wanted to put them in. And so, for instance, one of them that has been playing in my head recently for no reason in the book, during college, my best friend, who I call Sydney in the book, and I go back to visit Viv. So Viv is the character who's the drug addict and alcoholic. She's just gotten out of rehab. She's supposedly clean, and she wants us to go over to her house. And when we go from college, she doesn't leave for college. When we go over to her house, she can't wait for us to meet her boyfriend. But when we're in the kitchen meeting her boyfriend, he falls asleep and her parents are in the kitchen and everybody's talking about us at college and asking lots of questions. And I'm like, is anybody seeing that her boyfriend is nodding off at the table right now? This is midday. This is strange. What's happening? And I'm looking around and everybody's ignoring it. And then we get outside into the driveway and I say to Sydney, my best friend, I go, what was up with that guy? And she goes, I don't know what was worse. Her boyfriend having the head nods in the middle of the day or your furtive side glances. So like those are lines like that, a lot of lines like that, that I just always remember because that's a funny line. And so I'm happy to finally have a outlet. But I
Now everybody can
Yes.
enjoy that. And pretty crap line.
Exactly.
I'm curious, knowing you talked about the ages of your children or young adults that you have. How did, since the period of time of writing this book was 6-ish years, I think you said.
Yeah, more.
And the thought process, I'm sure you probably at least double that, and as you brought all those memories back. Is an influence, impact, any interactions with your kids, their ages during this whole time? What kind of influence did your writing this have on you?
It's so funny. A lot of people say to me, so because of your, incredibly intense and dangerous teenage experience, obviously, did you want to raise your kids different? I said, no, because what has happened is the opposite, which is that now we are all living in this helicopter parenting era, which I'm not happy about. Now, I don't think that I'm glad my kids are not as free range as I was, because that would have been very nerve wracking and terrifying for me. However, I don't like that they're bubble wrapped. I don't like that we monitor them and are seeing exactly where they are at all times. And if they're make a left out of their class instead of a right, we call them, are you lost right now? You need some help? I think we're not doing them any favors. And so because of my experience, and I do think it toughened me up, obviously, and I do think that it allowed me to be very self-sufficient and defend for myself. And I do credit my teenage experience with allowing me to become a journalist, because I use those skills all the time in my journalism. So it has made me want to give my kids an injection of some of that grit and to back off a little bit and to let them try to, make their mistakes and have some of that freedom. It's hard in this era, in this world, to give them that freedom. It's just not built for that anymore. But I try to give them some of that, but they're not standing on a street corner outside of CBGB's. Skin has a baseball bat.
Sorry.
I agree. Yeah.
Oops, there we go. That wasn't supposed to be the final bell. I do think it would be great. Thank you, everyone, for coming, for the questions, the discussion.
Thank you guys.
If you have more questions that you'd like to ask Alisyn, stick around for the signing. If you'd like to please purchase a copy of Alisyn's book. We've got them at the register just down the hallway. You get those, and then we'll have the signing line back in here.
Thank you guys. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alisyn. And thank you to Erica as well.